Is something wrong, officer?
Let me see your ID now.
Of course, but may I ask, what's this about?
We got a call that someone's playing dress up.
I am not. I can provide my military identification for verification purposes.
Stop. Hands where I can see them.
Sir, I'm really a Marine officer, and I'm just providing you my ID.
Officer Benedict Larson had been a cop for 15 years when he walked into that coffee shop and made the worst assumption of his life. He was 38 years old, confident in his instincts, and completely certain about what he was looking at. A black man in a Marine uniform who couldn't possibly be the real thing. What Larson didn't know, as he grabbed Mike Porter and threw him to the ground, was that he was assaulting a decorated combat veteran with 2 Iraq tours and a combat action ribbon. The 43 seconds Larson spent with his knee on Porter's neck, ignoring his repeated statements of, "I can't breathe," would cost him his badge, his freedom, and 27 years of his life. Larson had assessed the threat level in that coffee shop. He just didn't realize the real threat was his own arrogance. Mike Porter had earned his place among warriors. 2 tours in Iraq as a Marine Corps sergeant, commanding men through the chaos of Fallujah's streets, had forged him into someone who understood both violence and restraint. The combat action ribbon on his chest wasn't decoration. It was testament to firefights he survived, decisions made under impossible pressure, and brothers brought home alive. After his honorable discharge, Porter returned to civilian life with the same discipline that had served him in combat. He built a career as a financial advisor, earning trust and respect from clients who valued his steady judgment. Now he was pursuing his MBA, determined to prove that the leadership skills honed in war translated to success in peace. On this particular afternoon, Porter wore his Marine Corps dress blues. He'd just finished speaking at a local high school recruitment event, sharing his experiences with teenagers considering military service. The uniform still fit perfectly, the creases sharp, every ribbon and medal properly placed, according to regulations he could recite from memory. He stopped at a suburban Colorado coffee shop to work on a paper for his graduate program. It was a quiet place, filled with the gentle hum of conversation and the aroma of espresso. Porter ordered his coffee, found a corner table, opened his laptop, and settled in to work. The barista who would change his life watched him from behind the counter. She saw a black man in military dress, and her mind made an immediate calculation. Stolen valor. Someone pretending to be something they weren't. She didn't consider asking him about his service. She didn't notice the authentic details of his uniform. She simply picked up the phone and dialed 911. Her report was specific and damning. Suspicious person in fake military uniform causing a disturbance. Porter hadn't caused any disturbance. He was simply existing in a space where someone had decided he didn't belong. Officer Benedict Larson received the call. 15 years on the force had shaped him into someone who trusted his gut over evidence, who saw challenges to authority where others saw citizens exercising rights. His personnel file contained multiple excessive force complaints, all quietly buried under administrative reviews that led nowhere. His fellow officers knew him as someone who didn't take disrespect. Larson arrived at the coffee shop within minutes, his hand already resting on his service weapon. "You, military guy. Let me see your ID." Porter looked up from his laptop screen, momentarily confused by the officer's aggressive tone. Years of military training kicked in automatically. Assess the situation, identify the threat level, respond appropriately. The officer's body language screamed hostility, but Porter kept his voice calm and measured. It was the same tone he'd used to de-escalate situations in Iraqi marketplaces where one wrong word could trigger violence. "Excuse me, officer," Porter replied, his posture non-threatening but dignified. Larson took a step closer, his jaw visibly tight. "Your ID. Now. And your military credentials." Porter noted the lack of explanation, the absence of basic professional courtesy, but he didn't react emotionally. Combat had taught him that staying calm was often the difference between resolution and catastrophe. "Officer, I'm not sure what this is about, but I'm happy to show you my credentials. Is there a problem?" "Yeah, there's a problem." Larson's voice rose slightly. "We got a call about someone impersonating a Marine. That's a federal crime, buddy. Stolen valor." Porter nodded slowly, understanding now. He'd heard stories about stolen valor cases, people who falsely claimed military service for personal gain. It was despicable, and he understood why law enforcement took it seriously. "I completely understand stolen valor is a serious issue," Porter said, keeping his hands visible as he began reaching toward his wallet. "But I am a Marine. I can show you my—" "Keep your hands where I can see them." Larson's bark cut through the coffee shop's ambient noise. Porter froze, his hand hovering near his pocket. Around them, other patrons began to notice the confrontation. Several reached for their phones, sensing something was wrong. Porter placed both hands flat on the table in front of him, palms down, fingers spread. "My military ID is in my wallet, in my right front pocket," he said clearly, enunciating each word. "I'm going to retrieve it slowly. Is that acceptable, officer?" Larson's eyes narrowed, but he gave a curt nod. Inside, he was already building his narrative. Suspicious subject, evasive behavior, potential threat. The calm, articulate man in front of him didn't fit Larson's preconception of what this encounter should look like. That disconnect would prove fatal to Larson's career. Porter moved with deliberate slowness, making every motion visible. He extracted his wallet, opened it, and removed his military identification card, an official Department of Defense Common Access card with his photograph, rank, service dates, and embedded security features designed specifically to prevent forgery. He placed it on the table where Larson could see it clearly. Larson picked up the card, glanced at it for perhaps 3 seconds, then tossed it back on the table dismissively. This could be fake. Anyone can get these printed online. Porter felt the first stirring of real concern. The ID wasn't something that could be easily faked. It contained holographic elements, embedded chips, and security features that any law enforcement officer should recognize. "Officer, that's my official DoD identification card. It has multiple security features, including a smart chip that can be verified through—" "I'll decide what's legitimate," Larson interrupted, his voice hardening. "Stand up. You're coming with me for questioning downtown." Porter didn't move. His military training included extensive instruction on rules of engagement, understanding when force was appropriate, when it wasn't, and how to recognize situations spiraling toward unnecessary violence. This situation was spiraling. "Officer, am I being detained? What specific crime am I being charged with?" The question, perfectly reasonable and within Porter's constitutional rights, struck Larson like a personal insult. In his 15 years of law enforcement, Larson had grown accustomed to immediate compliance. He interpreted questions as challenges, constitutional knowledge as contempt of the cop. "Don't give me that rights lecture," Larson's face flushed. "I said stand up now, or I'll make you stand up." Porter remained seated, his voice still controlled despite the adrenaline now flooding his system. "Officer, I'm exercising my Fourth Amendment rights. I have provided identification. You have no probable cause to detain me. I'm asking again, what crime am I suspected of committing?" Each word, each assertion of constitutional knowledge, pushed Larson further from reason and closer to violence. He didn't see a citizen politely asserting their rights. He saw disrespect. He saw someone who needed to be taught compliance. Larson's hand shot out, grabbing Porter by the shoulder with enough force to rock him in his chair. "I said stand up!" Porter's body reacted instinctively, not aggressively, but with the trained muscle memory of someone who'd spent years maintaining tactical awareness of his physical position. He pulled his shoulder back, removing it from Larson's grip, while keeping his hands visible and elevated. "Don't touch me," Porter said firmly. "I haven't committed a crime. I don't consent to this detention." In Larson's mind, that instinctive movement, that verbal refusal to submit, confirmed everything. He keyed his radio. "This is Larson. I need backup at the coffee shop on Maple. Suspect is resisting." The words "suspect is resisting" carried weight in law enforcement culture. They were often the first step in justifying whatever came next. Officers Martinez and Thompson arrived within 3 minutes, their patrol car pulling up outside with lights flashing but no siren. They entered the coffee shop and immediately looked to Larson for assessment. He was the senior officer, the veteran. If Larson said there was a problem, there was a problem. Neither Martinez nor Thompson questioned Larson's narrative. Neither looked carefully at Porter's uniform or asked basic questions that might have revealed the truth. The thin blue line, that unspoken code of always supporting fellow officers, was already forming around Larson's version of events. "Suspect is resisting," Larson announced to his backup, though Porter remained seated at his table, hands now clearly visible on the surface, his military ID still lying where Larson had tossed it. Martinez and Thompson moved to flank Porter, positioning themselves on either side of his chair. The coffee shop had gone completely silent. The only sounds were the hiss of the espresso machine and the soft chime of cell phone cameras beginning to record. Porter looked at each officer in turn, then directly at Larson. His voice remained steady, but an edge of frustrated disbelief had crept in. "I am not resisting. I am a United States Marine. I have shown you my official identification. I have broken no laws. I am remaining seated because I do not consent to this unlawful detention." For Larson, this articulate resistance was the final straw. Larson's face darkened with rage. In his worldview, shaped by 15 years of encounters where his badge had been enough to compel immediate submission, Porter's calm assertion of rights represented the worst kind of insubordination. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Citizens were supposed to comply first and complain later. Preferably, never. "That's it," Larson declared. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." Porter's eyes widened slightly. "Obstruction of what?" "I've answered your questions. I've provided identification. What specific statute am I violating?" Larson had no answer because there was no answer. Porter had committed no crime. But Larson had committed himself to a course of action, and his pride wouldn't allow retreat. Instead of responding, he grabbed Porter's arm and yanked him upward with sudden, brutal force. Porter tried to maintain his balance as he was pulled from the chair. It was a natural, reflexive response. Any person suddenly jerked off balance will try to steady themselves. But Larson interpreted that steadying motion as resistance, as justification for what came next. In one violent movement, Larson swept Porter's legs out from under him and drove him face first toward the tile floor. The impact echoed through the coffee shop, a sickening sound of a human body hitting hard surface with full force. Porter's cheek struck the tile, his Marine Corps cap rolling away from the impact. And then Larson did something that would seal his fate. He dropped his knee onto Porter's neck. The pressure was immediate and terrifying. Porter, despite the shock, despite the pain, despite every instinct screaming to fight back with the combat training that could have easily overpowered Larson, made a calculated decision. He went completely limp, removing any possible justification for continued violence. "I can't breathe," Porter said, his voice strained but clear, spoken not frantically, but with the controlled delivery of someone creating an evidentiary record. "You are kneeling on my neck. Multiple witnesses are present. I am not resisting. I can't breathe." Larson kept his knee in place. 43 seconds. Body camera footage would later show every moment. Porter repeated it 4 times. "I can't breathe." The body cameras captured everything. 3 different angles: Larson's, Martinez's, and Thompson's, all recording from slightly different perspectives, but telling the same undeniable story. The footage showed Porter repeating, "I can't breathe," 4 separate times, his voice steady despite the pressure on his neck. It captured customers in the coffee shop shouting at Larson, "Get off him! He's not resisting! You're hurting him!" It captured Martinez and Thompson standing by, watching, neither intervening nor even documenting verbal concern for Porter's well-being. Their silence would later cost them their badges. But the cameras captured something else, something that Larson had completely missed in his tunnel vision aggression. Porter's dress uniform, visible in every frame, displayed multiple service ribbons arranged in precise military order. The Combat Action Ribbon with its red and gold colors, the Iraq Campaign Medal, the Marine Corps Good Conduct Medal. These weren't cheap imitations purchased from a costume shop. They were properly placed, regulation-compliant decorations that any veteran or military family member would immediately recognize as authentic. One of the customers recording on his phone was retired Army Colonel Robert Hayes, a decorated veteran who'd spent 30 years in uniform. Hayes would later provide a sworn statement that became crucial evidence. I could clearly see Staff Sergeant Porter's ribbons from my position 10 feet away. The Combat Action Ribbon was immediately recognizable. I knew without question this was a legitimate service member. I shouted to the officer, "He's real military! Check his ribbons!" The officer ignored me completely. Paramedics arrived after the coffee shop manager, terrified that Porter was being seriously injured, dialed 911 herself. They insisted Larson remove his knee, overriding his protest that the suspect was secured. Their examination of Porter revealed visible bruising forming on his neck, labored breathing, and elevated heart rate, consistent with someone who'd experienced a traumatic assault. They transported Porter to the hospital as a precautionary measure. During the ambulance ride, one paramedic quietly told Porter, "That was wrong. Document everything." At the hospital, Porter made the decisions that would define the case. He refused to sign any police documents until he'd consulted an attorney, a right many people don't know they have. He requested that the hospital document every injury with photographs and detailed medical notes. He asked the nurses to specifically photograph the bruising on his neck from multiple angles with proper lighting. And he immediately contacted the Marine Corps Veterans Affairs Office, setting in motion a parallel investigation that would add federal scrutiny to what Larson assumed would be a local matter, quietly forgotten. Larson's arrest report was filed within 2 hours of the incident. It painted a picture that bore no resemblance to reality. According to Larson's official documentation, Porter had been aggressive and threatening from initial contact. The report claimed Porter lunged at officers in a threatening manner and refused multiple lawful commands to show identification. It stated Porter had actively resisted arrest, requiring necessary force to secure the suspect. The report made no mention of Porter's military credentials. It falsely stated that Porter refused to provide identification when requested. It described the knee-on neck restraint as standard control techniques for a non-compliant suspect. Larson's narrative followed a template he'd used before. In his 15 years on the force, he'd written dozens of reports describing civilians as aggressive when they'd been calm, as threatening when they'd been cooperative, as resistant when they'd simply questioned his authority. Previous victims of Larson's excessive force had lacked the resources, documentation, or credibility to successfully challenge his version of events. Complaints had been filed, reviewed by Internal Affairs, and quietly dismissed with findings of proper police procedure or insufficient evidence to contradict officer testimony. Larson assumed this would follow the same pattern. A short administrative review, maybe a few days of paid leave, then back to duty with his record intact. He'd miscalculated in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Porter wasn't someone who could be intimidated into silence or dismissed as an unreliable witness. He understood chains of command from military experience. He knew the importance of documentation from combat operations, where after-action reports could mean the difference between medals and court-martials. He had the education and confidence to navigate legal systems that often overwhelmed victims of police violence. Within 24 hours, cell phone videos began appearing online. The footage, shot from multiple angles by different witnesses, spread rapidly across social media. The image was damning. A black man in Marine Corps dress blues, face down on a coffee shop floor. A white police officer's knee pressed into his neck. Ribbons and medals clearly visible on his uniform. The video went viral. Millions of views. Thousands of shares. Veterans groups across the country mobilized immediately, recognizing one of their own being abused. The Marine Corps issued an official statement confirming Porter's service record: 2 combat tours, honorable discharge, combat action ribbon, and expressing serious concern about his treatment. Civil rights organizations demanded federal investigation. Larson's body camera footage, obtained through public records requests, told a story that completely contradicted his written report. Within 72 hours, Larson's career was in free fall, and he didn't even know it yet. The local district attorney's initial response was predictable. After reviewing the case, she announced there was insufficient evidence of criminal wrongdoing to prosecute Larson. The statement referenced officer safety concerns and the difficulties of split-second decision-making in law enforcement. It was the standard response: protect the badge, trust the system, move on. But federal authorities saw something different. The FBI opened a civil rights investigation under 18 U.S.C. Prof. 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. This statute, a Reconstruction-era law designed to prosecute officials who abused their authority, carried serious federal prison time for violations. FBI agents reviewed the body camera footage, interviewed witnesses, and reached a conclusion starkly different from local authorities. Larson had committed multiple felonies. The federal indictment came 6 months later. 3 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, filing false police reports with intent to obstruct justice, and assault under color of authority. The false document charges proved particularly damaging because Larson's arrest report directly contradicted his own body camera footage, evidence not of misremembering or mistake, but of deliberate, calculated falsification. Larson's attorneys attempted every available defense. They argued for qualified immunity, claiming Larson had acted in good faith based on the 911 call reporting stolen valor. Federal prosecutors demolished this argument by demonstrating that Larson had been provided valid military identification, had multiple witnesses, including a retired Army colonel, correcting his false assumptions, and had continued his assault even after Porter displayed absolute non-resistance and verbally stated he couldn't breathe. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 12 witnesses testified, including Colonel Hayes, the paramedics, 4 coffee shop customers who'd recorded video, and Porter himself. The jury watched body camera footage that showed Larson barely glancing at Porter's military ID before dismissing it as fake. They saw cell phone videos capturing Porter's repeated statements that he couldn't breathe while Larson's knee remained on his neck. They heard testimony that Larson had ignored explicit warnings from witnesses that Porter was a legitimate Marine. Larson testified in his own defense. It proved catastrophic. Under cross-examination, he admitted he never properly examined Porter's military identification card. He admitted the ID looked genuine, but claimed he had a feeling it was fake based on experience and training. When prosecutors asked him to elaborate on what specific indicators suggested fraud, Larson couldn't articulate any. His testimony revealed what the jury already suspected. He'd made an assumption based on race, not evidence. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating in its simplicity. Officer Larson saw a black man in a Marine uniform and decided it had to be fake, despite valid identification presented clearly, despite the uniform displaying proper insignia and ribbons, despite multiple witnesses telling him he was wrong. He chose to escalate to violence rather than admit his assumption was incorrect. And then he filed a false report to cover his actions. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman announced guilty verdicts on all 3 counts. Larson showed no visible reaction, but his attorney's face told the story. They'd lost completely. Sentencing came 2 months later. The federal judge, a Reagan appointee with a reputation for being tough on crime, reviewed Larson's personnel file in detail. She noted the pattern of excessive force complaints, all dismissed through internal reviews. She noted that witnesses in previous incidents had complained of false police reports, claims that were never seriously investigated. She noted Larson's complete lack of remorse or acknowledgement of wrongdoing during the trial. "Officer Larson," the judge said, "you placed your knee on this man's neck in a coffee shop full of witnesses while he repeatedly told you he couldn't breathe. You did this to a decorated combat veteran who had committed no crime whatsoever. Your actions were not a split-second decision in a dangerous situation. This was a sustained assault born from racial assumption, personal ego, and abuse of authority. Then you attempted to cover your crime with false documentation." The sentence: 27 years in federal prison, 15 years for civil rights violations under color of law, 10 years for the assault, and 2 years for filing false documents, all to be served consecutively. The lengthy sentence reflected federal sentencing guidelines for crimes committed under color of authority, enhanced by the deliberate nature of the assault and Larson's calculated attempt to obstruct justice through false reporting. The civil lawsuit that followed resulted in a $3.2 million settlement paid by the city and police department. Porter used the money to establish the Veterans Legal Defense Foundation, providing free legal assistance to veterans facing discrimination and police misconduct. The organization has since assisted over 200 veterans in civil rights cases. The police department faced a federal consent decree mandating sweeping reforms, mandatory implicit bias training, stricter use of force policies requiring de-escalation attempts before physical contact, body camera footage review by independent civilian oversight, and a new policy requiring officers to actually examine identification documents before making stolen valor arrests. 3 additional officers were terminated: Larson's supervising sergeant for ignoring previous complaints, and Martinez and Thompson for failing to intervene during the assault. Porter completed his MBA and now works as a consultant to police departments nationwide, conducting training seminars on de-escalation, implicit bias recognition, and constitutional policing. He frequently shows the body camera footage from his own arrest as a teaching tool, using his trauma to prevent others from experiencing the same injustice. Larson is currently serving his sentence in federal prison. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. His earliest possible release date is over 2 decades away. The thin blue line that had protected him through years of misconduct finally broke, not because the system worked as designed, but because he made the mistake of assaulting someone who had the resources, knowledge, and determination to fight back through legal channels. In the coffee shop where it happened, local veterans groups donated a plaque. It hangs near the table where Porter sat that day. The inscription reads, "In memory of justice delayed, in honor of justice finally served."